A limestone fragment sits in the shrine of the book in Jerusalem. The catalog reference is 4Q216. It is one of 15 copies of the Book of Jubilees recovered from the caves above the Dead Sea between 1947 and 1956. 15 copies. More than the Book of Joshua, more than Proverbs, more than Ecclesiastes, more than Chronicles. The community that hid those scrolls in desert jars considered Jubilees important enough to copy 15 separate times. The church that came after them removed it from the Bible entirely. And what Jubilees contains about the first murder in human history is the reason why. Genesis tells you that Cain killed Abel. It tells you that God cursed Cain and sent him east of Eden into a place called the land of Nod. It tells you that Cain built a city and named it after his son. And then Genesis goes completely silent. Cain simply vanishes from the text. No death, no burial, no final accounting, no justice described. The first murderer in the Bible walks off the page, builds his city, and never appears again. That silence is not accidental. It is the space the church needed, and the Book of Jubilees is the text that filled it. Before you go further, this channel exists to read what was removed from Scripture. If that question matters to you, subscribe now. Every week, another sealed text, another answer they buried. Jubilees was removed from the Western biblical canon at the Council of Laodicea in 364 of the Common Era, the same council that removed the Book of Enoch. Both books fell together. Both survived in the same place, inside the walls of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, preserved in Ge'ez for 1700 years, rediscovered by the Scottish traveler James Bruce in 1773. The Ethiopian Church's 81-book canon kept what the Council of Laodicea discarded. It kept Enoch. It kept Jubilees. It kept the names and the answers. The Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed what the Ethiopians had preserved. Fragment 4Q216, Fragment 4Q217, Fragment 4Q218 through 4Q223, 15 separate manuscripts of Jubilees, scattered across 5 different caves at Qumran, the oldest fragment dating paleographically to approximately 100 BC. James Vanderkam of the University of Notre Dame, whose critical translation of Jubilees remains the scholarly standard in English, compared those Qumran Hebrew fragments with the complete Ge'ez version preserved in Ethiopia and found them in precise agreement. What the Ethiopian church kept is what the original said. And what the original said about Cain is something no Sunday school has ever taught. Here is what the text says. Jubilees chapter 4, verse 31. The direct rendering from the Ge'ez, confirmed by the Qumran Hebrew fragments. At the close of this Jubilee, Cain was killed after him in the same year. For his house fell upon him, and he died in the midst of his house. And he was killed by its stones. For with a stone he had killed Abel, and by a stone was he killed in righteous judgment. Cain's own house killed him, the stones of his own construction. The walls he built with his own hands fell on the body that had used a stone to commit the first murder. And then Jubilees records what was entered on the heavenly tablets because of this. By the instrument with which a man kills his fellow, he is to be killed. As he wounded him, so are they to do to him. That phrase, the heavenly tablets, appears more than 50 times in Jubilees. It is the mechanism by which Jubilees argues that the laws given to Moses were not new. They were already written in heaven before the flood, before Abraham, before Enoch. The law that said a murderer must die by the same instrument was not Mosaic. It was cosmic. It predated creation, and the death of Cain was its first demonstration. This is the claim that the Council of Laodicea could not accommodate, not because it was violent, because it was specific, because it placed the origin of divine law before Sinai, because it turned the death of a man who left no body into a case study in cosmic justice. But the death of Cain in Jubilees is only the first layer of what this text contains, because there is a second tradition, and it says something completely different. And the contradiction between them is one of the most significant and most ignored problems in the study of ancient Jewish scripture. The Book of Jasher is cited by name in the canonical Bible in 2 places. Joshua chapter 10, verse 13, 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 18. The same Bible that removed Jubilees and Enoch explicitly tells you that Jasher exists and asks, is this not written in the Book of Jasher? Jasher chapter 2, verses 26 through 29 describes the death of Cain, and it bears no resemblance to what Jubilees says. According to Jasher, Cain was not killed by his house. Cain was killed by his own descendant, by Lamech, in the 7th generation from Adam. Lamech was old and his eyes had gone dim. He had become blind, but he was still a hunter. His young son Tubal-Cain led him through the field, guiding his hands toward sounds in the brush. One afternoon, Tubal-Cain saw something moving in the distance, something that looked, from far away, like a wild animal. He told his blind father to shoot. Lamech fitted an arrow and a stone in his sling and fired toward where his son pointed. When they walked to where the thing had fallen, they found Cain lying dead on the ground, arrow in his side, stone across his face, killed by his own flesh and blood, 7 generations later, mistaken for an animal in a field. The stone again, the same instrument, 7 generations after Abel, and this time in the hands of someone who did not even know what he was doing. Jasher says that when Lamech realized what he had killed, he struck his hands together in grief, and in doing so, accidentally struck his own son Tubal-Cain and killed him too. Then Lamech's wives refused to come near him, and Lamech said to his wives, in the words that appear verbatim in Genesis 4, I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for bruising me. Genesis 4, verse 23. It is one of the most mysterious passages in the book. Lamech speaks of 2 killings. The canonical text gives no explanation for what he is confessing to. No commentary in the mainstream tradition explains it satisfactorily. Jasher says that passage is Lamech confessing that he killed Cain and then accidentally killed Tubal-Cain. The Bible contains the confession. The explanation was removed when Jasher was removed. This is not a contradiction that any church council could cleanly resolve. 2 ancient texts, Jubilees preserved in 15 copies at Qumran, Jasher cited by name in 2 canonical books, both saying different things about the same event. Jubilees says Cain's house fell on him. Jasher says Lamech shot him. Both agree on the instrument, stone. Both agree on the justice. It was deserved. Neither agrees on the mechanism. And Genesis preserves neither account. It preserves only Lamech's confession, stripped of its context. Now here is where it becomes something else entirely. In the rabbinic tradition recorded by Louis Ginsberg in his 6-volume Legends of the Jews, Lamech's son Tubal-Cain could see the mark that God had placed on Cain from a distance. He described it to his blind father as the sign of a wild animal. Because the mark of Cain, the oath, the sign placed on Cain in Genesis 4 verse 15, was, in the tradition of the Targums and the rabbinic sources, a horn on his forehead, visible at distance, mistakable for an animal. Tubal-Cain saw the horn and told his father it was a beast. Lamech shot a man. That is what Lamech's confession means. That is what the text of Genesis 4 is pointing at, and the explanation was removed from the Western tradition so completely that 1,700 years of readers read the confession and had no key for it. But what Jubilees does with the mark of Cain is more theologically significant than anything in Jasher, because Jubilees describes the Cain and Abel story in more detail than Genesis. It names Cain's wife, Awan, daughter of Eve. It names Abel's first wife, Azurah, daughter of Eve, who later married Seth after Abel's death. It records the birth of the first city. It records the death of Cain. It records the heavenly tablets. And it does not mention the mark of Cain once, not in passing, not in a footnote, not as an aside. The mark of Cain does not appear in Jubilees. James Vanderkam noted this as a deliberate editorial decision by whoever composed Jubilees. The mark was known. It is in Genesis. But the author of Jubilees chose not to carry it into the narrative. And that choice had consequences that lasted 17 centuries, because without Jubilees, the silence about the mark is total. Genesis says God placed a sign on Cain so that no one would kill him. It does not say what the sign was. It does not say what it looked like. It does not say where it appeared on his body. And into that silence, 1,700 years of readers poured whatever they needed the mark to be. Augustine of Hippo in the 4th century connected the mark of Cain to the Jewish people as a sign of wandering and separation. Isidore of Seville in the 7th century connected it to circumcision. In the 18th and 19th centuries, European theologians and slave traders connected the mark of Cain to dark skin color. That interpretation was used to justify the transatlantic slave trade. It was written into the founding documents of denominations in the United States to exclude Black Americans from ordination and church leadership. It shaped the theology of segregation. It was preached from pulpits. None of that is in Genesis. None of it is in Jubilees. All of it is projection into the silence that the removal of Jubilees created and maintained. Jubilees, by omitting the mark and by eliminating the line of Cain entirely at the flood, destroys the theological foundation for every one of those interpretations. Here is what Jubilees establishes about the end of Cain's line. None of Noah's sons descended from Cain. The ark carried the line of Seth. Genesis chapter 5, the genealogy from Adam to Noah, follows Seth, not Cain. Genesis chapter 10, the table of nations after the flood, lists only the descendants of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. There is no Cain in the post-flood world. No mark of Cain passed to any living person. The line of Cain entered the flood and did not come out. This is not theological speculation. It is the plain reading of Genesis 5 and Genesis 10. Jubilees makes explicit what Genesis leaves as structural implication. And a church that needed the mark of Cain to remain open, available for whatever interpretation was required in whatever century, could not tolerate a text that closed that question with finality. The Council of Laodicea removed it in 364. Jerome did not translate it. Augustine did not endorse it. For 1,700 years, the Western Church had only the silence, and it used that silence accordingly. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church kept Jubilees in its canon for those same 1,700 years. They kept the name Awan. They kept the cosmic law on the heavenly tablets. They kept the death by stones. They kept the answer. The 15 copies at Qumran were sealed in clay jars and hidden in desert cliffs sometime around the 1st century of the Common Era. The people who hid them did not know if they would ever be found. They copied Jubilees 15 times before they hid it. More than Joshua, more than Proverbs. They thought what Jubilees contained was worth the effort of 15 copies, and a sealed jar, and a cliff above the Dead Sea. The man who finally found them in 1947 was a Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Ed-Dib, who was looking for a lost goat. He threw a stone into a cave and heard something break. He climbed in and found jars. Inside the jars were scrolls, a stone. In the cave where a text about stones was hidden. The instrument keeps returning. Genesis never told you how Cain died. It left him alive, walking east, building his city, and said nothing more. Jubilees filled that silence with a collapsed house and righteous judgment, and a cosmic law that predated Moses. Jasher filled it with a blind man and a stone from a sling, and a son who did not know what he had shot. And the canonical Bible preserved Lamech's confession without the story it confesses to. 2,000 years passed. The jars held. The fragment is still in Jerusalem. The Ge'ez manuscripts are still in Ethiopia. The answer Jubilees gave to a question Genesis left open is still exactly what it always was. If this kind of investigation is what you come here for, subscribe. Every week, another removed text, another closed silence, another answer that waited 2,000 years in a sealed jar to be read. The stones are still there. So is the question. And the answer has been sitting in fragment 4Q216 for over 2,000 years.